Come with tired and broken spirit, he welcomes you with love. Come confused, in need or searching, he welcomes you with love. Come with joy and come with sorrow, he welcomes you with love. God welcomes us all with love. He never turns away those coming, he welcomes you with love. He never turns away those calling, he welcomes you with love. He never turns away a seeker, he welcomes you with love. God welcomes us all with love. His arms stretch wider than our failures, he welcomes you with love. And no past fault was off the Savior, he welcomes you with love. Jesus, he is so much greater, he welcomes you with love. God welcomes us all with love. His heart is kind, his love is patient, he welcomes us with love. And there's no need for fear or acting, he welcomes you with love. His hands they offer warmth, inclusion, God welcomes you with love. God welcomes us all in love.
Good morning to you all, and a very warm welcome to Shabbat at the house. My name is Natalie Kendel, and I will be your host for today. You've joined us on the official YouTube channel of the house. The house is a house church where we often get together on Saturdays to share stories, music, and more. You can enjoy the recordings of these online here on our channel in your own time. Coming up, today we will be singing together, announcing some exciting events coming up this autumn, and we'll be exploring a story found in the book of Ruth. To begin this morning, I have a few bits of information for you. First off, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive notifications when we're live or when we've uploaded new videos. We communicate what events are happening and when on our social media platforms. So to stay up to date on our events, you can find us on Facebook or on Instagram. A special thank you today to Shairon Milliard, one of our patrons on our Patreon. Since we are a nonprofit, our supporters help us to do everything from the background research, media creation, graphics, music recordings, and so much more. Even when you simply share our content online, you are supporting us there too. So thank you so much, and thank you for being here. Next in our info bits, if you're interested in free audiobooks to listen to, then Read Aloud Corner might be something for you. At Read Aloud Corner, we pick really good books and they are made available as audiobooks on YouTube. For example, In the past, I've read through the Chronicles of Narnia series, and we've just completed the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis. We will soon embark as well on the adventures of Robin Hood. Read Aloud Corner is great if you're looking for something to wind down with at the end of the day, or perhaps listen to while you're out and about. Click the link below to discover the full audiobook playlist and be alerted to future uploads by subscribing. Sometimes at the house, we share recommendations, good books, YouTubers, content makers that are worth going and checking out. Our recommendation today is of a movie in the making called The David Movie. The David Movie will be an animation movie. It is currently being worked on by some of the best animators in the business, from large studios such as DreamWorks and Disney Pixar. The movie will tell the story of King David's life from when he's a child to being crowned King of Israel. Here are a few stills from the movie. And we're going to watch a bit of a clip the studio has released, part of the trailer for the David movie. Let's watch that. The production team on this project are working to make this movie the same quality as The Prince of Egypt, and the team hope to release it in the summer of 2024. So although the release date is a while away still, you can read more about the upcoming motion picture, and if you're interested, support their project on their website. You can find this link in the description below. Speaking of upcoming events, I'd like to share two exciting events with you that are on the horizon here at the house. Two events you won't want to miss out on, because in October, there are 2 days which we'll be celebrating together here at the house: the Day of Atonement and the Feast of Tabernacles. These 2 days are highly important events in the Jewish calendar found in the Bible, and their meaning and significance immensely deep and impactful for us today. What we're going to do is celebrate these 2 special days together during Shabbat at the house. So after today, we will not be having Shabbat at the house until October. So we're going to have a break. But then when October comes, we will celebrate the Day of Atonement, or called in Hebrew Yom Kippur, at Shabbat at the house on the 1st of October. That will happen here on the same YouTube channel from 11 a.m. in the morning. And the following week, we'll celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles on the 8th of October. During both these days, we'll learn why these days matter, what they mean, how they affect us, and how they fit into the larger biblical narrative. Which means that Shabbat at the house on these 2 events will be extra special. 2 extra special Sabbaths together. So take the time to jot them down in your calendar if you're interested, and we'll post all the information about these events on our Facebook and Instagram as we get closer to those dates. And I hope that you'll be able to join us on October the 1st and 8th. Lastly, for the information bits, we sometimes share a segment here called How to Be Image Bearers. During this, we look at many and diverse examples that people can communicate God's love in the world around them. Today's example is taken from Twitter, where @EileyJones shares, "A girl in my sorority once ran across campus to bring me a battery for my insulin pump because I was in lab. And today she pulled out a handful of batteries and said she carries them around just in case I need one. And it's honestly the nicest thing anyone's ever done for me." May we be inspired by this loving example. Let's sing together God of Every Hour, and then we'll jump straight into our story for today, taken from the book of Ruth.
You are God of every hour, every part of the road ahead. In the night of deep confusion and the morning filled with joy, you are God of every moment in our anger and our pain. You have seen each falling sparrow, noticed every heart afraid. You are God of every person, every culture, every age. Any souls may call upon you. You have heard each thought we've prayed. You are God of every season, when we reap and when we sow. You are Lord of all the journey, fully relevant, God of all.
In the history of this world, there have been told many kind of love stories. Some epic and timeless, some about sacrifice, others about foolishness or longing or tragedy. Well, today we are going to be looking at a love story. And this particular one is all about choices. Extraordinary choices made by ordinary people. And this story begins in the book of Ruth. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. When they had lived there for about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons or her husband. So here we're introduced to the main characters in this story, to Naomi and her family. And life has not been kind to them. First of all, they had to flee from famine in Judah, where they'd come from the village of Bethlehem. Bethlehem in Hebrew is Beit Lechem, meaning house of bread. Imagine being that unfortunate, the irony of there being a famine in the house of bread. But Naomi and her family's misfortunes don't stop there. For though they fled from famine, they were met by death in Moab. Moab was a country down the road from Israel, but these two neighboring nations were not on friendly terms. The Moabites were enemies of Israel. And Naomi, following the death of her husband and her two sons, finds herself in a desperate situation. She has nothing. She is vulnerable, surrounded by foreigners in a foreign culture, with no husband, no children, no one to support her. And she needs to make a life-changing decision. Is she going to remain in Moab? Or is she going to return to Bethlehem in Judah and somehow, by some means, as an old widow, support herself there? Well, she decides she's going to return to Bethlehem. Her two daughters-in-law, who are widows themselves, accompany her on her way. They come to where the path parts, and it's time to say goodbye. And quite touchingly, both Orpah and Ruth offer to go the whole way with Naomi on the dangerous journey back to Bethlehem. But Naomi looks at this situation logically, with common sense, and she advises them from verse 11. But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands?" She says, "Go back to Moab. That's the common sense thing to do. Look after yourselves and your own interests. Don't take on my burdens." And so Orpah and Ruth are faced with a choice. Do they go back to the safety and familiarity of their homeland and perhaps stand a chance at remarrying? Or do they take the radical choice and go with Naomi to a foreign country and try to find a way to support this old woman? Orpah makes her choice. In verse 14, she kisses her mother-in-law goodbye. Ruth makes a decision too. Verse 14, but Ruth clung to her. Two different women, two different choices. Now let's be clear, Orpah isn't bad for having made the choice she did. She simply makes a different one than Ruth. And Ruth, after all, hasn't made an easy decision. Not only is she going to a foreign land to support Naomi, but Naomi, it turns out, is not the easiest of company. Ruth's mother-in-law has clearly experienced tragedy in her life, that's for sure, and she makes sure that everybody knows it. As the women travel, here's an example of how Naomi went on. Middle of verse 13, "No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." And later on, verse 20, "Call me no longer Naomi," which means pleasant. "Call me Mara," which means bitter. "For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" Now imagine leaving everything you know, and then having to listen to that kind of talk all the way from Moab to Bethlehem. Ruth, after all, had experienced a great loss too. And here her mother-in-law is waxing long about how she is more afflicted than them, than anyone it would seem. Ruth, however, despite this, makes a choice. "Do not press me to leave you, to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." Now, Naomi has not had one good word to say about God in this entire ordeal. She hasn't been giving any warm, positive testimonies about her faith or making any kind of glowing recommendation about the joys of following Israel's God. And yet, astoundingly, not only does Ruth commit herself to Naomi, but she commits herself to Naomi's God, a God that Naomi can find nothing good to say about. A truly surprising and extraordinary choice. And this choice leads to Ruth arriving in Bethlehem. And in order to get food for her and Naomi, she goes to glean in the barley fields. England has just seen a pretty horrendous heat wave this past July. It was an unprecedented spike in temperature and ended up beating the national heat record. All over the country, roads and signposts were melting from the heat. And of course, that heat affects not only people, but animals and nature too. My husband and I have lived in the English countryside for a few years now, and we are surrounded by fields on all sides of wheat, barley, oats, carrots, and corn. And each year we see the farmers out harvesting their crop. Now, usually this harvesting takes place in the autumn, maybe late August, but usually in September. But this year, because of the heat which sped up the maturing of the wheat, farmers had to be out harvesting their fields till late into the night, trying to gather in everything before the heat wave came, before there was a chance that their fields could catch fire or the crop be spoiled. Now, just as Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem, it was also during the time of harvesting, the barley harvest. And as we said, Ruth went to glean in the fields to find food for her and her mother-in-law. Gleaners would follow after the harvesters through the fields, and they'd pick up any scraps of grain the harvesters had missed or dropped. It was tiring work, back-breaking work, with little reward, a task reserved for the very poor and the very desperate. And Ruth is willing to do all this because of her remarkable choice. Well, Ruth isn't the only one making extraordinary choices in this story, as we continue to read in Ruth chapter 2, verse 3. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "To whom does this young woman belong?" The young man who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She's the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." Here we're introduced to a new character, a man called Boaz. Boaz is a wealthy landowner in Bethlehem and a relative of Naomi's late husband Elimelech. And on this day he comes to inspect his workers and look over the fields they're harvesting. He sees Ruth and asks about her and is told by one of his servants where she's come from and what she's doing there. Let's imagine for a second how this information would have sounded to a Judean. It's not a positive list of descriptions. Number 1, Ruth is a foreigner, and it's not unheard of for natives to feel suspicious of foreigners when they come to work in their country, is it? Funny, that sounds a bit familiar to how things are today. Not only is Ruth a foreigner, but she's a Moabite. And like we said earlier, Moabites were sworn enemies of Israel. There were constant fights, skirmishes, and general hatred between these two neighboring peoples. These people worship different gods too, and so Ruth would have been seen by the Judeans as a threat, not only coming to take our jobs and our resources, but an idolatrous, unclean woman. Just such a woman as young Israelite men would be warned to not go after for fear they might be corrupted. And on top of that, Ruth might have been seen as a foreign woman who had stolen one of Judah's young men. Both Naomi's sons had married Moabite women, taking them in essence off the market for any Judean single women. And now both sons were dead on top of everything. Had they been cursed for marrying Moabites? And who was going to be this widow's next victim? So there was a lot of negative baggage and disparaging information hanging around Ruth. And at this point, many Judeans might have turned Ruth away from their field, saying, "Stay away from my workers and hands off the few grains left for our poor women." Ask yourself for a moment, how would the average man have treated her in this situation? What would the average man do? Now let's have a look at what Boaz does. What does he choose? Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." Let's break this down. Boaz, instead of shunning Ruth, actually looks after her. First of all, he offers her safety, saying, "Don't go to other fields, stay here." He then offers her belonging by saying, "You can work closely with the Judean women who are also reaping in my field." And then he orders the young men who work for him not to bother her, as they might be tempted to treat her badly because she's not only a woman by herself, but she's a Moabite woman, thus considered of less worth or importance. And finally, on top of all this, he says, "If you're thirsty, go to where the others drink, and drink from the same vessels as the men." Now this would be considered shocking to some Israelites, because Ruth is considered ceremonially unclean, meaning that if someone is, for example, under the same roof as her, they are in turn made ceremonially unclean too, and whatever she touches is also considered unclean. Now she's being invited to touch the very drinking vessels the other workers are using, and drink, in essence, from the same cups as them. By this, Boaz is sending her a clear and loud message. I don't consider you unclean or an outcast. You are an equal here, deserving of respect and kind treatment. And he's sending the same message to everyone else as well. It is clear that just as Ruth is not your average woman, Boaz is not your average man. What a radical, unprecedented choice made by this wealthy Judean landowner. Well, how does Ruth respond? Then she fell prostrate, with her face to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner?" But Boaz's kindness doesn't stop there. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some of this bread, and dip your morsel in the sour wine." So she sat beside the reapers, and he heaped up for her some parched grain. She ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she got up to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, "Let her glean even among the standing sheaves, and do not reproach her. You must also pull out some handfuls for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." Let's break this down again. Boaz allows Ruth, considered unclean by the others, to eat from their food, to dip her bread in the same plate of vinegar as theirs. She sits with Judeans. He heaps up for her some grain. She eats until she's full and even has leftovers. And when she's gone off to resume her work, Boaz tells his men to allow her to pick not just from the fallen scraps, but from the actually standing barley, and even for them to drop some extra handfuls of barley for her to gather. That night, Ruth returns with a large amount of grain to Naomi and tells her the story of what happened in the fields that day. Chapter 3. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, I need to seek some security for you, so that it may be well with you. Now here is our kinsman, Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now wash and put on perfume, and put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." She said to her, "All that you say I will do." Behind our choices lie motives, reasons, agendas, intentions behind our actions. Now, what was the motive behind Naomi's words? The Hebrew language, the original language of this text, has this literary style of sometimes being purposefully ambiguous. And this here is just such an example of purposeful ambiguity. Because Naomi's words, "uncover his feet," has two possible meanings. On the one hand, it can mean, well, just that. Literally uncover his feet. Peel back his blanket and let his feet be uncovered and cold. But to uncover someone's feet is also a Hebrew idiom meaning to be sexually intimate with someone. This, coupled with Naomi's additional instructions for Ruth to bathe and perfume herself and put on her best clothes and wait till Boaz has his fill on food and wine and do whatever Boaz tells her to do, makes the meaning of Naomi's words even more suggestive. So what exactly is Naomi suggesting to Ruth? What is she advising that Ruth do? Let's read the next few verses. So she, that is Ruth, went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and was in a contented mood, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and there, lying at his feet, was a woman. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant." So, there they are, in the darkness. No one knows they're there. No one else is around. What choices might they have in this situation? Now, if this was a Hollywood movie, a Hollywood rom-com or an epic romance, I think we know very well what would happen next. And we certainly get an idea of what Naomi wanted to happen in this situation. And in any case, nobody would know. No one would find out. There could be all sorts of rationalizations that Boaz could come up with in his mind at this point. Number one, Ruth was a Moabite, not an Israelite. Her people weren't given the laws of Moses, so would he really be breaking any law? Number two, Ruth was in essence presenting herself. She'd come here of her own free will in the middle of the night and seemed to be making advances. Number three, Ruth isn't married. She didn't belong to anyone, have a protector, and she didn't have any prospects. Maybe he'd be showing her a kindness, doing her a favor. Perhaps she was lonely. Some of the most important choices we make are those we make when nobody sees us, when there's nobody else around and nobody else would know. It's those choices that perhaps indicate the most the heart of the kind of person we are. Choices we make when nobody else would know. But here, at this point, there's yet another major twist to this story, because something becomes clear here. Ruth has not come to Boaz to seduce him. No, this extraordinary woman has come to do something even more radical, even more daring and courageous than that. Something which is frankly breathtaking. This story we're reading here was set in a patriarchal society, a society where men make the decisions and men call the shots. Now, Naomi was arguably pimping out Ruth. Naomi was trying to secure some sort of bond between Ruth and Boaz, perhaps one which would lead to matrimony, perhaps one which would lead to a pregnancy, or even a sugar daddy of sorts. But Ruth doesn't make that choice. Yes, she goes to Boaz, but she ignores Naomi's suggestions, her underhanded methods, and instead she defies social convention and rules. Because here, in this scene, Ruth is proposing to Boaz. Let's read verse 9 again. She said, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." Now, to spread the corner of one's garment over someone was marital language. It is used as a proposal metaphor, and even God himself used it when referring to him as a husband to his people. You can see this, for example, referenced in Ezekiel 16. So Ruth, as a woman, as a foreign Moabite woman, is making a marriage proposal to this wealthy Judean man in a patriarchal society. I know some women even today who would be horrified at the idea of not being proposed to, but doing so themselves. I also know some men who would be deeply insulted or confused if they were proposed to by a woman. It's not right, they'd say. It's just not done. It can be hard for some of us to imagine how unbelievably unheard of and extreme this was in the days and culture of Ruth and Boaz. A woman proposing to a man, and unbelievably, amazingly, Boaz accepts. The twists and turns of this story, the unexpected, unusual choices of these two people just keeps coming. Boaz's pride isn't wounded. He's not insulted by this scandalous thing. No, instead, he expresses how honored he is that she asked him, that she chose him. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. Now, at this point in the story, the final difficulty, the final hurdle presents itself. Because in this culture, there were certain laws about who of kin may take responsibility for a woman who is widowed. And Boaz says to Ruth, "There is another man who stands in line to be the one to marry you, a kinsman of Naomi. And in order for us to get legally and rightfully married, I need to go speak to him and make sure he doesn't wish to make his legal claim and instead relinquishes it." At this point, us as readers can perhaps feel the anxiety rising. Will Ruth and Boaz be together? Or will this other relative come in and mess up the trajectory of this story? Well, Boaz goes and sees this other kin the very next morning. Chapter 4, verse 3. He, Boaz, then said to the next of kin, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. And the kinsman said, I will redeem it. Meaning he is interested, he claims the land, he wants to take on the land left behind by Naomi's late husband. After all, who wouldn't want some more land? Easy choice. But, adds Boaz, the day you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, you are also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance. Now at hearing this, the kinsman has second thoughts. At this, the next of kin said, I cannot redeem it for myself without damaging my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Interesting. The kinsman has made a choice. He was willing to accept the land, but upon hearing that he, as was customary in that culture, would also take on the responsibility of caring for, protecting, feeding, and housing two poor widows, he says, You know what? On second thought, I'm not that interested after all. When it benefited him, the kinsman accepted. But now the kinsman could choose to help two defenseless women and give them security, or he could choose to not help at all. And to him, it's not even a question. Why would I marry Ruth when that would be to my disadvantage? When it wouldn't benefit me? So, easy choice. And so this love story comes to a climax, because Boaz marries Ruth. Now some of us may today look at Boaz's choice and think, well, what he chose wasn't that extraordinary. Him marrying Ruth wasn't that hard of a decision. After all, here was a young, beautiful, willing woman. He clearly likes her. Was his choice that much of a surprise? Was it that extraordinary? Well, we've already mentioned one thing which would have stopped most men from marrying Ruth, and that was that she's a Moabite. She's a member of the enemy. No self-respecting Judean would marry a Moabite woman. Imagine what the other people in Bethlehem would say. Not only would Ruth likely be ill-treated, but Boaz also stands the chance of being shunned. He be considered perpetually unclean for having her under his roof, or, in the least, socially unacceptable. Ruth being a Moabite is a big, logical, reasonable reason not to marry her. But there's one more thing. A really big thing. Boaz knows something which we as readers in our time and cultural context have likely missed. Something you can bet nobody in that time and culture would have failed to notice. Ruth has been married before, for quite some years, possibly for up to 10 years. And she has no children. Ruth has no children. In this culture, that could only mean one thing. Ruth is a barren woman. In a culture that prized a woman's fertility above almost everything else about her, no man would knowingly marry a barren woman. Children were considered gifts and blessings from God. A childless woman would be considered stricken by God or cursed or less than. In a culture where one's legacy and family wealth was passed down to one's sons, and the family inheritance was secured by children, no man would willingly marry a barren woman. But Boaz did. He did. That was the choice he made. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. They named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the descendants of Perez. Perez became the father of Hezron, Hezron of Ram, Ram of Amminadab, Amminadab of Nahshon, Nahshon of Salmon, Salmon of Boaz, Boaz of Obed, Obed of Jesse, and Jesse of David. King David, of whom Jesus himself was descended, to be later born in the city of David, the house of bread in Bethlehem. The story of Ruth and Boaz is arguably about two normal, everyday, ordinary people, but two people who made some unusual and extraordinary choices. One might say, well, where is God in this story? He doesn't really seem like a main character in this tale. There are no great wonders, no seas parting, no mountains moved. God is revealed in this story through the everyday decisions of people, as they make a living, in how they treat strangers and foreigners, in their relationships, their conversations, in drinking and eating, walking and moving, in how they act, even when no one's watching. Everyday choices speaking volumes. Ruth didn't have to go with Naomi. She didn't have to show such patience, humility, loyalty. Boaz didn't have to marry Ruth. He didn't have to show kindness to a stranger, go the extra mile, be inclusive or generous or thoughtful. But they did. Ruth and Boaz transcended social norms and cultural rules in order to make better, extraordinary choices. As much as we humans talk about wanting to be special, many of us sure spend a lot of time in our lives trying to be ordinary, trying to fit in with everyone else, not to stand out or be too different. It's tempting sometimes to just blend in with the crowd and not do anything that will rock the boat, because rocking the boat comes with risks, and it's often not easy. But it's the extraordinary decisions, even those made in the private corners of our lives, that make for truly amazing things. Now here we're not talking about our own moral perfectionism or our own superiority, but about how our God too transcends cultural norms and social convention, the opinions of others, the gossip of neighbors, the walls built by human beings, in order to show kindness to strangers, and inclusion to foreigners, compassion, generosity to the poor, help to the vulnerable, support for the underdog, community to the outcast, love to those considered less worthy, and honor to those seen as irrelevant. The courageous choices of Ruth and Boaz reveal to us and those around them the courage and heart of their God. And this was done without a single sermon being delivered or a single Bible study given. There is great power found in the everyday choices of ordinary people, who dare to transcend the rules and limitations of the ordinary in order to dare to show the extraordinary compassion of their God. And that is a love story worth telling? Let us think about this as we sing together the song Living Letters.
What does your life speak of when they see you? And how does his love play out on your journey? You are the living letters there for others to read. You may be the only Bible they ever crack open. Your life is a scroll unrolling, telling a story of faith. Oh, let your life be a testimony of grace. There's much to say, and there's little time to say it. So let our lives be the proof that God is loving. You are the living letters there for others to read. You may be the only Bible they ever crack open. Your life is a scroll unrolling, telling a story of faith. Oh, let your life be a testimony of grace. Not in it, but written by the Spirit. We are the living letters there for others to read. We may be the only Bible they ever crack open. Our life is a scroll unrolling, telling a story of faith. Oh, let my life be a testimony of
Lord, please grow in us the courage and the integrity to make extraordinary choices. even when no one's looking, and that this may be in how we treat others, or it may be in being kind to ourselves, although we have a lifetime's worth of not being so. Or it might be overlooking the social conventions which keep us from greater love. Even conventions we find in our churches, in our family, in our friend group. Let fear not dictate what we do. And let us also not be afraid that failing might mean rejection from you, because it never does. You are the quiet voice which says, try again, as though patiently allowing for a million false starts. And being extraordinary is not always the big gestures that we've been told. Please shift our focus to understand that we don't always have to sail across the world to make amazing choices. Sometimes it's found in the seemingly mundane and insignificant moments we make every day. Please, Jesus, let your presence be felt clearly and closely by all who wish that today. Let your shalom be with us. Grow in us new dreams, new hope for the future, new comfort for our wounds. Make our hearts wild with imagination and passion, and strong with patience and wisdom. You hear the quiet prayers of everyone here. You know what we feel, what's happened to us this week. Please meet each person on their path and give them exactly what they need. Let it be so. Thank you all so much for spending your time with us at Shabbat at the house today. May the shalom of Jesus be with you. Shabbat shalom. See you next time.